The Septic Rebellion, a tale of pipes and power. It was a crisp autumn morning in Oak Ridge Meadows, a tidy suburban enclave just outside the city limits of Raleigh, North Carolina. The kind of place where every lawn was manicured, every mailbox matched, and every neighbor knew the HOA's rulebook better than their own kids' birthdays. I was standing at my bathroom sink, toothbrush in hand, when it happened. A low, ominous gurgle from the drain, followed by a hiss, and then a foul brown sludge bubbled up like something out of a horror movie. I spat, gagged, and froze as the stench hit me. Somewhere outside, a truck horn blared, sharp and desperate. I threw on my robe, slid into my slippers, and bolted out the front door. There, at the edge of my driveway, I saw it. The septic truck, its red and white logo glinting in the morning sun, reversing out of the neighborhood's service gate. The driver, Tom, gave me a helpless shrug as he pointed toward Linda Harper, the HOA president, standing like a sentinel in a neon vest 2 sizes too small. She clutched a laminated rulebook like it was the Constitution itself, her face twisted in a smug grin as she waved it at me. "No unapproved vehicles," she shouted, her voice carrying over the quiet street. "We have standards, Mr. Bennett." I tried to explain my septic system was backing up, my drains were rebelling, but Linda cut me off with a wave of her hand, her manicured nails flashing like tiny daggers. "File a form next time," she snapped, turning back to the gate. Behind me, I could hear the faint gurgle of my pipes, a warning that something much worse was brewing. Linda thought she was protecting Oak Ridge Meadows' pristine image, but she was about to learn what happens when you block a septic truck in a neighborhood sitting on a ticking time bomb. I'd lived in Oak Ridge for 5 years, tucked at the edge of the subdivision on a lot just outside the city's sewer grid. My home came with a fully permitted, up-to-code septic system, a detail that had never bothered anyone until Linda took over the HOA last fall. A retired real estate agent with a penchant for power, Linda had made it her mission to enforce community symmetry with an iron fist. My solar panels were too reflective, she claimed. My motion sensor lights were too bright. And my septic system, despite being odorless and maintained like clockwork, was her latest obsession. She called it a public health hazard in her emails to the board, conveniently ignoring the county permits I'd shown her multiple times. Her vendetta started smelling a note about my lawn being uneven, a complaint about my hedges' untidy corners. But it escalated when she snapped photos of Tom's septic truck during a routine pump-out and sent them to the board, accusing me of dumping toxic waste in the neighborhood. I'd laughed it off at first, but Linda was relentless. She pushed the HOA to cite obscure bylaws, even suggesting I reroute my system to a non-existent public sewer line. When I showed up to a meeting with my permits and a letter from the county, she dismissed me with a flick of her wrist and a lecture about aesthetic standards. This time, she'd gone too far. I'd scheduled my routine pump-out for Tuesday, like I did every 3 months. Tom always used the side service gate, a gravel path designed for utility vehicles. But Linda had padlocked it overnight and posted a glittery sign: "No utility vehicles without 14-day notice." When Tom arrived, she stood in front of his truck, filming with her phone like she was auditioning for a reality show. "This is for the community's safety," she declared as Tom tried to reason with her. 20 minutes, he said. That's all it would take. But Linda wouldn't budge, and Tom had no choice but to leave. By the time I ran outside, the sludge had started creeping into my shower. I shut off the water, closed every drain, and checked my septic app. The tank was at 85% capacity and climbing fast. I had maybe 12 hours before disaster. I called the HOA's emergency line voicemail. I emailed the board, no response. I even walked to the clubhouse, where Linda was hosting a members-only yoga retreat. The door was locked, and through the window, I saw her sipping cucumber water while residents stretched on mats. When I knocked, she glanced at me, whispered to a neighbor, and mouthed, "Rules are rules." Back home, I checked my septic app again, 92%. The system was designed with an emergency overflow line, a last resort feature tied to a shared drainage system that ran beneath the HOA's prized clubhouse. I'd never used it, but if Linda wouldn't let Tom in, I'd have no choice. I spent the evening double-checking my permits, calling the county inspector, and leaving a voicemail documenting every step. I wasn't about to let Linda pin this on me. By midnight, A new sound echoed from my basement to burbling, like the pipes were gargling something unholy. I knew what was coming. The question was whether I'd let it flood my home or let the system do what it was built to do. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Sarah. It was a photo of brown liquid seeping across the clubhouse lawn, oozing from the walkway and under the doors. The caption read, "Is this normal?" I poured a coffee, sat by my window, and watched the chaos unfold. Linda, dressed in a white blouse and beige slacks, arrived to host her weekly brunch. She froze as the stench hit her, her clipboard slipping from her hands. The overflow had begun, and it wasn't in my yard, it was all over hers. The sun was barely up, but Oak Ridge Meadows was already buzzing with chaos. From my porch, I watched as Linda Harper stood in the clubhouse parking lot, her pristine outfit now a stark contrast to the brown sludge pooling around her feet. The air carried a stench so foul it could have peeled paint, and her brunch guests, mostly elderly HOA members, and a few local socialites, were scattering like roaches under a flashlight. One woman, clutching her purse, lost a sandal in the mulch as she fled. Another man, handkerchief pressed to his face, muttered something about the lake bursting. Linda, ever the commander, waved her clipboard and shouted orders to no one in particular, blaming a system failure and demanding someone fix it. But there was no maintenance team. Linda had nixed that budget last year in favor of decorative planters and fake security cameras. I sipped my coffee, binoculars in hand, not out of glee but necessity. If this went south, I needed to be ready. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. Sarah sent another. "It's everywhere now." Mike, from across the street, wrote, "Linda looks like she's gonna hurl." Then came a video from Emma, showing a geyser of wastewater shooting 6 feet from a storm drain, splattering Linda's SUV. I didn't smile, but I felt a quiet vindication. I'd warned her. I'd emailed, called, even knocked on the clubhouse door. She'd ignored it all, and now her precious community image was drowning in the very mess she'd created. The trouble had been brewing long before the sludge hit. Linda's reign as HOA president had turned Oak Ridge Meadows into a pressure cooker. She'd started with petty complaints fining people for unapproved mailbox colors or excessive holiday lights, but it escalated into a personal crusade against anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. My septic system was just her latest target. She'd called it a blemish on the neighborhood, despite my permits and 5 years of flawless operation. She'd even tried to rally the board to force me to connect to a public sewer that didn't exist. When I showed up to a meeting with county documents, she'd smirked and said, "We'll see about that." Her latest stunt, locking the service gate and banning utility vehicles without a 14-day notice, was the breaking point. My septic tank needed pumping every 3 months, a routine I'd followed without issue. Tom, the driver, was a pro, in and out in 20 minutes. But Linda saw his truck as an eyesore, a blight on her curated utopia. When she padlocked the gate and stood there filming Tom like he was a criminal, she didn't just block a truck, she blocked the only thing keeping my system, and the neighborhood's shared drainage, from collapsing. Now, the consequences were undeniable. The clubhouse, Oak Ridge's crown jewel, was a swamp. The tiled floor was submerged, the walls stained, and the air thick with a smell that clung to everything. Linda's brunch guests were gone, replaced by a growing crowd of curious neighbors snapping photos and whispering. Some looked horrified, others were trying not to laugh. I stayed on my porch, keeping my distance. I'd learned long ago that HOA politics were a minefield. One wrong move, and I'd be the villain, no matter how many permits I had. By 9 a.m., Lucas Carter, the county inspector, arrived. He was a no-nonsense guy, mid-50s, with a clipboard and a GoPro strapped to his vest. I'd called him the night before, forwarding my logs, emails, and permits. He'd promised to check it out, and now he was here, wading through the mess. Linda met him at the sidewalk, waving her arms like she was directing traffic, pointing at my house, the sky, even the power lines, as if they were to blame. Lucas nodded politely, then headed to the backflow hatch near the clubhouse. He opened it, peered inside, and let out a low whistle. "That's enough," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. He turned to Linda, who was still ranting about unauthorized trucks and community standards. Lucas cut her off with a single sentence. "Ma'am, you obstructed critical infrastructure." That's a violation of county and environmental codes. The crowd went silent, save for a nervous cough from Harold, a frail board member who promptly slipped on a wet patch and landed in the mulch. No one helped him up. Lucas's words hung in the air like a guillotine. Linda's face turned the color of the sludge at her feet, her voice cracking as she tried to pivot. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted, but Lucas was already jotting notes. He confirmed what I'd known. My septic system's overflow, triggered legally when the tank hit capacity, had released into the shared drainage line under the clubhouse. Every step was documented: sensors, logs, permits. My hands were clean. Linda's, on the other hand, were covered in metaphorical muck. By noon, the clubhouse was cordoned off with yellow tape, and a hazmat team was on site, assessing the damage. A news van pulled up, tipped off by viral videos with titles like "HOA President Drowns in Sewage" and "Karma Clogs the Clubhouse." Linda tried to shoo the reporters away, but one caught her stepping into a puddle, the stain creeping up her beige slacks. The footage hit local TV by lunchtime, and my phone didn't stop buzzing. Neighbors texted, some outraged, some amused, all united by one thing: Linda had gone too far. I stayed quiet, letting the chaos speak for itself. But I wasn't idle. I gathered my evidence: emails, timestamps, video of Linda at the gate and headed to the HOA office at 2 p.m. A small crowd was already there, some angry, some laughing, some just confused. The office door had a sign, "Closed for emergency maintenance." I knocked, and Ellen, a junior board member who'd never liked Linda, let me in. "It's a war zone," she whispered. Inside, Linda was pacing, red-faced, yelling into her phone. The treasurer, George, and the secretary, Diane, sat at the conference table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I dropped my folder of documents on the table. "Here's everything," I said. "Logs, permits, videos, county approvals. Read it before you try to pin this on me." Linda spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she snapped. I smiled. "No, I just think plumbing matters." George, the treasurer, finally spoke up. "Linda, you crossed a line. A literal one." Diane nodded. "You locked the gate during a service window and lied about it." I walked out, leaving Linda to stew. Outside, neighbors had set up folding chairs, some munching popcorn like they were watching a movie. The clubhouse lawn was now a spectacle, a monument to Linda's hubris. By 5 p.m., an emergency HOA meeting was called, not in the clubhouse, but under a canopy in the parking lot. Linda arrived late, clutching her purse like a shield. She tried to start the meeting, but the crowd wasn't having it. Someone held up a sign, "Drain Linda." The uprising had begun. Residents stood, one by one, airing grievances. A retired couple complained about fines for wind chimes. A single mom shared how Linda harassed her over her kid's bike. A disabled vet described being cited for visually disruptive home modifications. The stories piled up, each one a brick in the wall of frustration Linda had built. She tried to regain control, but her voice was drowned out by boos and laughter. The board, under pressure, agreed to schedule a no-confidence vote within the week. Linda stormed off, stepping over the caution tape like it didn't exist. That night, I sat on my porch, the moonlight glinting off the still wet pavement. The air felt different, not just cleaner, but lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the odd man out with the septic system. I felt like the guy who'd reminded everyone what happens when you mess with the pipes. The morning after the emergency meeting, Oak Ridge Meadows woke to an eerie calm. The yellow caution tape around the clubhouse fluttered in the breeze, a grim reminder of the previous day's disaster. The stench lingered, but it was more than just the smell of sewage. It was the stink of a community unraveling. Linda Harper's reign as HOA president had been a slow poison, and the clubhouse flood was the moment it spilled over, exposing the rot beneath her polished facade. I sat on my porch with a second cup of coffee, watching neighbors pass by. Some waved, others nodded, but there was a shared understanding in their eyes. Something had to change. Linda's house, usually a beacon of HOA perfection with its seasonal wreaths and manicured flower beds, was dark. Her porch lights, once timed to military precision, were off. Her security cameras, which had glared at the street like judgmental eyes, were gone. Whispers spread through the neighborhood. Some said she was holed up, frantically calling lawyers. Others claimed she was scrubbing her social media of HOA-related posts. A few swore they'd seen a moving truck circling the block at midnight, but no one could confirm it. What was clear was that Linda had lost her grip on Oak Ridge Meadows, and everyone felt it. I wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over. Linda was a fighter, the kind who'd rather burn the rulebook than admit defeat. Around noon, I found a letter in my mailbox, hand-delivered, not mailed. It was a formal HOA violation notice, accusing me of improper waste disposal endangering communal property. The irony was almost laughable. Attached was a grainy photo of my septic control panel, clearly taken by someone peering over my fence. Linda's signature was scrawled at the bottom, underlined twice like a declaration of war. I checked my security footage and, sure enough, there she was at 5:46 a.m., balanced on a garden stool, phone raised high to snap pictures through my trellis. I saved the clip to my growing file. Linda wasn't just desperate, she was spiraling. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was waking up. Ellen, the junior board member who'd let me into the HOA office, took charge in Linda's absence. She organized a walkthrough to assess the state of Oak Ridge Meadows, and I joined, along with Sarah, Mike, and a few others. We saw things we'd ignored for too long: sidewalks choked with weeds, faded signs, cracked curbs painted over instead of repaired. Linda's obsession with control had masked a deeper neglect. The HOA had been so busy finding people for minor infractions that it had let the community's bones decay. At the clubhouse, Lucas Carter, the county inspector, was back with a restoration team. He greeted us with a grim nod. "The foundation's shot," he said, pointing to the warped concrete. "The plumbing underneath is compromised. You're looking at a full rebuild." The words hit like a punch. The clubhouse wasn't just a building, it was where we held 4th of July barbecues, wedding receptions, kids' birthday parties. Linda's meddling hadn't just flooded it. It had stolen something central to Oak Ridge. Neighbors exchanged glances, the weight of it sinking in. That afternoon, the tension spread. My neighbor Paul, a plumber who'd lived here for 16 years, flagged me down by his truck. He pointed to a new sign near the east gate. "Authorized personnel only. Service vehicles must check in with HOA president." He scratched his head. "My repair guy got turned away this morning," he said. 16 years, and I've never needed permission for a pipe fix." Linda's desperation was infecting everyone now, her rules tightening like a noose. Paul's frustration mirrored my own, and I could see it in others too. A single mom fined for her kid's skateboard, a retiree cited for a non-compliant birdhouse. Linda's chaos was no longer just my problem. By evening, a crowd gathered outside the temporary HOA tent, some with lawn chairs, others with stacks of old citations. It felt like a strange mix of picnic and protest. Linda showed up late, wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, like she was dodging paparazzi. She clutched a typed statement and began reading half apologies laced with defiance, blaming unforeseen system issues and non-compliant residents. The crowd wasn't buying it. Ellen stood, her usual quiet demeanor replaced with steel. "Enough," she said, holding up her phone. "You blame the guy who warned you, Linda. We have his permits, his emails, your texts." She paused, letting the words land. "This isn't leadership." A murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by scattered claps. Linda's face tightened, her voice rising. "This is a smear campaign. There are rules, and if I don't enforce them, who will?" But her allies were silent. George, the treasurer, raised a shaky hand. "Linda, it's over. People are angry. You've turned this place into a circus." The questions came fast after that. Residents shared stories: a couple fined for a porch swing, a vet harassed over a ramp for his wheelchair, a teacher cited for unesthetic garden lights. Each story chipped away at Linda's armor, and by the end, she looked smaller, her voice gone. She stood there, swallowing whatever was left of her pride. Ellen took over, outlining the no-confidence vote process. Ballots would be distributed, verified, and counted transparently. No one objected. That night, Lucas called me. His report was nearly done, and it was damning. Linda's obstruction of my septic service violated municipal and environmental codes. The HOA was liable for the clubhouse damages, estimated in the tens of thousands. "Good luck explaining that to the insurance company with video of her padlocking the gate," he said, chuckling. "I finalized my evidence packet: mails, videos, permits naming it Operation Backflow. I printed copies for the board and made flash drives for anyone who asked. The facts would do the talking. The next morning, my doorbell rang. It was a group of neighbors some I barely knew holding coffee and donuts. One, Greg, handed me a thank you card. For standing up to her, he said. You didn't just save your house. You saved us. I invited them in, not for celebration, but connection. For the first time, Oak Ridge felt like a community again, not a battleground. We made plans to clean up the East Service Road, neglected under Linda's watch. Sarah offered to host the next meeting at her house. Another neighbor, Diane, who worked in city records, suggested drafting clearer property exemption rules. Real leadership was emerging, not from power grabs, but from people stepping up. That evening, we gathered at the Clubhouse site, now a cordoned-off ruin. Someone set up a projector, playing a movie on a bedsheet. Kids sprawled on blankets, neighbors shared snacks, and for a few hours, Oak Ridge was just a neighborhood, no fines, no inspections, just people. As I watched, I thought back to that first gurgle in my sink. It wasn't just a plumbing failure. It was the crack that let the truth spill out. Linda's control had been an illusion, and now, with the mess in the open, we could finally start cleaning it up. The days following the emergency meeting felt like the calm after a storm, but the air in Oak Ridge Meadows still carried a faint whiff of tension and sewage. The clubhouse, now a condemned shell, stood as a testament to Linda Harper's spectacular failure. Yellow caution tape fluttered around its perimeter, and the hazmat team's industrial fans did little to mask the lingering stench. Neighbors avoided the site, not just because of the smell, but because it symbolized something deeper, a community that had let one woman's ego run unchecked for too long. I woke each morning expecting another of Linda's desperate moves, but her house remained dark, her porch eerily bare. The rumor mill churned some said she was consulting lawyers, others that she'd fled to her sister's place upstate. Whatever the truth, her absence was palpable, like a weight lifted from the neighborhood's shoulders. But Linda wasn't done yet. At noon on Wednesday, a new email landed in every resident's inbox, sent from her official HOA account. It was a 4-page manifesto, dripping with defiance. She claimed she'd acted solely to protect property values and followed the rulebook to the letter. She accused certain residents of sabotage, hinting at a conspiracy to undermine her leadership. There wasn't a single apology, not even a nod to the clubhouse disaster or the viral videos of her stepping into a puddle of sludge. The email ended with a plea to stand with me for order and standards. I read it twice, half expecting her to mention my septic system by name, but she'd learned enough to keep it vague. Still, I knew who she was targeting. The neighborhood's response was swift and brutal, not in words, but in silence. No one replied to her email. No one tore down the printed copy she'd taped to the community board. It just sat there, ignored, like a campaign poster for a candidate who'd already lost. Her words had no weight anymore. The no-confidence vote was set for Friday evening, and ballots had already been distributed, sealed envelopes with a simple question: should Linda Harper be removed as HOA president effective immediately? I watched neighbors drop their ballots into the temporary drop box, some with purpose, others with a quiet relief. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming sanity. Meanwhile, the new board led by Ellen, with Sarah and Greg stepping up, moved fast. They set up a temporary meeting space in Sarah's garage, complete with folding tables and string lights. On Thursday, they held an open forum, inviting every resident to share ideas for reform. It was a stark contrast to Linda's tightly controlled meetings, where speaking out of turn earned you a glare and a fine. People brought cookies, coffee, even a few bottles of wine. The atmosphere was informal but electric, like a town hall where everyone actually wanted to be there. A retired couple suggested a community garden. A young dad proposed a kids' no-rules day at the park. Diane, the city records clerk, offered to draft a common-sense exemption for properties like mine with unique setups. The clause passed unanimously, and for the first time in years, I felt like my septic system wasn't a scarlet letter. The real shift, though, was in how people talked. Under Linda, conversations were guarded, laced with fear of being reported for a crooked mailbox or an unapproved paint color. Now, neighbors disagreed openly, debated ideas, and laughed without looking over their shoulders. Greg, who'd nearly sold his house to escape the HOA's pressure, stood up and said, "I used to feel like I was living in a museum, where you could look but not touch. Now it feels like a home." The room clapped, not out of obligation, but because it was true. Back at the clubhouse, Lucas Carter's final report arrived, with a courtesy copy sent to me. It was a masterpiece of clarity. Linda's decision to lock the service gate and block my septic truck violated county and environmental codes. My overflow release was legal, triggered automatically when the tank hit capacity, and fully documented. The HOA was liable for the damages estimated at $80,000 and climbing because of her actions. Lucas noted the video evidence of Linda padlocking the gate, adding dryly, "Insurance adjusters don't take kindly to deliberate obstruction." I could almost hear his smirk through the page. I spent Thursday night updating my evidence packet, now dubbed Operation Backflow, in a moment of dark humor. It included everything: emails, timestamps, permits, security footage of Linda sneaking photos over my fence. I printed copies for the board and burned backups onto flash drives. I didn't need to attack Linda, the facts were doing that for me. But I wasn't naive. She'd already tried to pin the disaster on me with that violation notice, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. Friday morning brought another surprise. A teenager named Ethan, who lived a few houses down, showed up at my door with an envelope. He was the quiet type, always tinkering with his skateboard in the driveway. "This is from my mom," he said, handing it over with a shy grin. "She says you're the guy who stopped the HOA from going nuts." Inside was a handwritten thank you note and a $10 Starbucks gift card. I chuckled at the gesture but felt the weight of it. Linda's overreach had touched more lives than I'd realized, and people were starting to come out of the woodwork to say so. That evening, the no-confidence vote took place under the temporary tent. Ellen, Sarah, and 2 other residents oversaw the count, every step transparent. Neighbors gathered, some in lawn chairs, others standing, all watching as ballots were opened and tallied. When Ellen read the results, 136 votes for removal, 8 against, the silence was heavy, not with tension, but with closure. Linda, who'd been watching from her parked SUV, didn't get out. She started the engine and drove off without a word. It was over. But the story didn't end there. The clubhouse was still a wreck, and the HOA faced a mountain of work repairs, budgets, new policies. Ellen and the new board wasted no time. They launched an online portal for feedback, scheduled monthly town halls, and invited volunteers to help rebuild. To my surprise, people stepped up: retirees, young parents, even kids with ideas for park improvements. The neighborhood felt alive again, not just a collection of houses, but a community. On Saturday, we organized a workday to clear debris from the clubhouse site. As we pried up warped floorboards, someone found a box tucked behind a cabinet. Inside were years of Linda's notes, complaints, citations, even unsent drafts. One griped about a dog that barked too cheerfully. Another called a neighbor's lawn aggressively green. We passed the box around, and for the first time, people laughed, real, cathartic laughter. That night, we set up a projector on the cleared site, playing a movie on a bedsheet. Kids ran around, neighbors shared snacks, and the air felt clean, not just of sewage but of fear. As I sat on my porch later, I thought about the gurgle that started it all. It wasn't just a plumbing issue. It was the spark that exposed Linda's tyranny. The cracks in her control had let light into Oak Ridge Meadows, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. The sun rose over Oak Ridge Meadows with a quiet promise, the kind that follows a long, messy storm. The clubhouse site, still roped off with yellow tape, looked like a battlefield, its warped foundation and stained walls a stark reminder of the chaos Linda Harper had unleashed. But the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer, as if the air itself had been scrubbed clean. For the first time in years, there were no passive-aggressive notes taped to mailboxes, no HOA patrol cars circling like hawks, no sidelong glances from neighbors afraid of being reported for a crooked shutter. The tension that had gripped Oak Ridge was gone, replaced by something fragile but real: hope. Linda's absence was official now. By mid-morning, a moving truck pulled into her driveway, its crew quietly loading boxes and furniture. Her porch, once a showcase of seasonal decor, was bare. Neighbors whispered that she'd flown to her sister's house in Virginia, leaving the movers to handle the rest. No one waved her off. No one needed to. It wasn't about gloating, it was about moving on. I didn't feel anger toward Linda anymore, just a quiet pity. She'd built her identity around control, and when it crumbled, she had nothing left to stand on. Her name would linger in stories and jokes for a while, but soon she'd be just another chapter in Oak Ridge's history, a cautionary tale of power gone wrong. The new board, Ellen, Sarah, Greg, and Diane, hit the ground running. They held their first official meeting in Sarah's garage, a far cry from the clubhouse's polished conference room, but somehow more fitting. Neighbors packed the space, spilling onto the driveway with folding chairs and thermoses of coffee. The agenda wasn't about fines or rulebooks, it was about rebuilding. Ellen proposed a transparent budget to address the clubhouse damages, estimated at $100,000 after the hazmat team's final assessment. Diane suggested redirecting funds from Linda's pet projects like those fake security cameras to actual maintenance. Greg pushed for a community-led cleanup of the East Service Road, which had been neglected for years. Every idea was met with nods, not glares, and for the first time, people felt heard. The biggest change was the common-sense exemption clause, now officially part of the HOA bylaws. It protected homeowners like me with unique setup septic systems, solar panels, accessibility ramps from arbitrary citations. When Ellen read the clause aloud, the room erupted in applause. I caught Sarah's eye, and she gave me a small nod. It wasn't just about my septic tank. It was about ensuring no one else would face Linda's vendettas. The clause felt like a shield, a promise that Oak Ridge would value people over perfection. The community workday that followed was unlike anything Oak Ridge had seen. Neighbors showed up with gloves, shovels, and wheelbarrows to clear the clubhouse debris. Kids hauled branches, retirees sorted salvageable materials, and someone blasted classic rock from a portable speaker. It wasn't just about cleaning up, it was about reclaiming the space. During a break, we found another of Linda's stashes, a binder of complaints she'd never sent, including one about a neighbor's excessively festive Halloween decorations. We laughed, not out of spite, but because it felt like exorcising a ghost. That evening, we gathered on the cleared site for a picnic. Paul brought his grill, Sarah set up a slip-and slide for the kids, and Diane handed out lemonade. Dogs ran free, and no one cared. It was the first time in years Oak Ridge felt like a neighborhood, not a prison. A week later, a package arrived at my doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a golden toilet seat, polished to a shine, engraved with the words, "The Throne of Truth." A note was tucked beside it. For the man who kept the flow going the right way. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. No one ever claimed credit, but I suspected Sarah or Greg. I bolted it to my garage wall, right above my workbench, where it gleamed like a trophy. Every time I saw it, I was reminded not of the sewage, but of what came after the unity, the laughter, the community we'd rebuilt from the mess. The clubhouse rebuild would take time. The board hired contractors, vetted through open meetings where residents could ask questions. They reworked the budget, cutting frivolous expenses and prioritizing essentials like plumbing upgrades and sidewalk repairs. Diane's city records expertise helped streamline the process, ensuring every dollar was accounted for. The new board also launched a website where residents could submit feedback anonymously, a stark contrast to Linda's reign of fear. Monthly town halls became a staple, each one packed with ideas: bike paths, a community garden, even a mural contest for the kids. Oak Ridge was starting to feel like a place where people lived, not just existed. One evening, as I sat on my porch, I watched kids chase fireflies across the green space where the clubhouse once stood. Parents shared wine under string lights, their laughter carrying over the breeze. Greg stopped by, beer in hand, and we talked about the future, not just the clubhouse, but the neighborhood itself. We were all holding our breath, he said. You didn't just fix your pipes. You let us breathe again. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I hadn't done anything extraordinary, just stood my ground with a folder of evidence and a septic system that wouldn't quit. The real victory wasn't mine, it was Oak Ridge's. The mess hadn't just exposed Linda's flaws. It had revealed the strength of a community that had been silenced for too long. Neighbors who'd once avoided each other now waved across fences. People who'd hidden behind closed doors now shared stories at block parties. The cracks Linda had tried to paper over had let light in, and that light was spreading. My septic system, once a target, was now just a detail, like a mailbox or a garden. And when I heard a toilet flush in the distance, I smiled, knowing it would stay where it belonged. The saga that started with a gurgle ended with a neighborhood reborn. The golden toilet seat on my garage wall wasn't just a jokey, it was a reminder that sometimes it takes a mess to find what's worth saving. Oak Ridge Meadows wasn't perfect, but it was ours again, built on trust, not tyranny. And that was worth every ounce of sludge. What did you think of the story? Linda's actions sparked a rebellion, but they also raised bigger questions about power, fairness, and standing up to injustice. Have you ever faced a situation where someone abused their authority, whether in an HOA, workplace, or elsewhere? How did you handle it? Did it bring people together or tear them apart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on navigating conflict and fighting for what's right. Let's keep the conversation going.